Hello and welcome to Rewildology, the podcast that explores conservation, travel, and rewilding the planet. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell-Norman, conservation biologist and adventure traveler. What do whitewater rafting trips, rock climbing ascents, multi-day hikes, treks through the jungle, and safaris through the bush have in common? They are led by adventure guides. This seemingly glamorous profession attracts wanderlust-filled souls, but it isn't all that it appears to be. What does it take to become a good guide? What are the often overlooked difficulties of this field? And, most importantly, why are adventure guides important for facilitating conservation action? In today's episode, we're sitting down with Colby Brokvist, a professional adventure guide and author. Colby spent most of his childhood exploring the outdoors, and he knew that he wanted to pursue a degree in environmental sciences in college. However, when his career wasn't following the trajectory he envisioned, he packed his bags and hiked the entire Appalachian Trail, a journey that took him over 5 months to complete. While on the trail, he and his hiking companion became the local resource for the do's and don'ts of the trail, which inspired him to pursue guiding. Fast forward to present day, and now Colby leads conservation travel trips all over the world. Since the adventure travel sector is growing at a significant rate, Colby recently published a book called The Professional Guide's Handbook: How to Lead Adventure Travel Trips and Expeditions. If you've wondered what it takes to become a world-class guide, are considering becoming a guide, or wonder where adventure guiding fits in the conservation realm, then you're in for a treat. Just a quick heads up that we recorded this episode at my place with my new mic from Focusrite, and while Colby sounds phenomenal, I'll admit that I didn't place myself in the best position for the highest sound quality. Luckily, Colby does most of the talking, so hopefully it'll be okay with you. I'm still learning something new every day, even after almost 70 interviews. All right, friends, here is my conversation with Colby. Thanks again for coming all the way to my place to talk about your very interesting story and just getting into all of these really exciting things that you're doing right now. Just super cool. But before we get to all of that, I have to know, when in your life did you know that you wanted to become a guide?
Oh, right. That's a question I've been actually asked a fair amount lately. And but the answer is easy. I still remember it was when I was hiking the Appalachian Trail, actually. I didn't quite know where my career was taking me. I had a degree in environmental sciences, and I was working for a consulting firm. And I got into environmental work because I wanted to spend a lot of time outdoors, and that's how I imagined it. And I'm like, oh, the environment is outside. And it turns out that those jobs are basically in the construction industry, and you're destroying wetlands, or, you know, all the engineering things that go along with environmental impact studies. And we were doing everything from asbestos remediation to, you know, tearing down mill sites and moving wetlands around. And so it was sort of disenchanting for me. I had always wanted to backpack the Appalachian Trail. And so after 10 months of consulting work, I went and did that. It took 5 months and 5 days. And for those listeners that have never been on a long trail backpack before, the thing that maybe people don't realize is you run out of things to think about really fast.
Really?
Yeah, like whatever's happening at home, or, you know, at school, at work, in family life, all these things, you know, that you're worried about, and I need to be there for that. And it's like all these decisions and these things, projects that are happening, they just fade away after a week or two, because whatever was going to happen, whatever decisions needed to be made were made. And then suddenly everybody starts being really present. So now all of a sudden you have this whole group of hikers that are going like for weeks on end, either doing big sections or they're on the whole trail like me. And they suddenly started realizing that there were like all these pretty purple flowers around, and, oh, we're going in between national parks and national forest. What's the difference? And me and my hiking companion, we knew the answers to those because we had degrees, we had studied this stuff. And so over the course of a number of weeks out there, like we became the guys to come to that were like, hey, what are these plants? Can I eat these plants? How come we're in a national park now? What can I and can I not do in a national park? And how does this work? And it was really fun. And somewhere up in Virginia, we were sitting around the campfire and having some of these conversations. And there was a guy we had been hiking with for a while. And he's like, it's a lot of fun to hike with you too. You should do this for a living. And that prompted a conversation where we were like, well, of course, nobody's going to pay you to just go walk around in the woods with them and like point out stuff, right? But it turns out that that's a real thing. And once I came to realize that, I set my sights on that and I became a professional guide.
Wow. So it sounds like it was obviously an insanely transformative experience going through all of that. So let's take it back a step further. Were you always interested in the outdoors? And so this was a very natural progression of your life trajectory, or were you not really an outdoorsy kid? So like maybe explain a little bit of your childhood too. I think would be interesting.
Always in the outdoors. Pretty much spent my youth like dressed in full camouflage, and I always had a walkie-talkie on me. Yeah, my friends and I, like in our free time, we'd either go mountain biking or we'd chase wildlife around, respectfully, like I say chase them around, but like, we'd go track deer. We'd try to find pheasants out in the fields and like all these things and try to learn about the wildlife. I spent a lot of time fishing and hiking, and my father was a big driver in that. He would take us out into the woods, into the wilderness all the time. And we were really fortunate where we lived in Massachusetts was sort of on the edge of like you could get everything that you needed from the city and this sort of thing. But if I, took the roads in the opposite direction, including right across the street from me, we had access to these enormous, just natural spaces. So like in the wintertime, Dad, he was a sheet metal fabricator, and he made this big giant sled with a big box on it. We can go ice fishing, and we had our skates and our hockey sticks and all this food and hot chocolate and all these things. And we would just hook it up right at the house and walk it across the street and go 2 miles down to the lake with it, just touring it through the woods. And we'd spend the days in the winter skating and fishing and there were all sorts of extensions of that in all the different seasons. So always in the outdoors. And I knew that, going into the Boy Scouts, that it was, all about, spending time in the outdoors and nature and camping and learning all of those skills. Yeah, to be competent in the outdoors. So then when it was time to go to college, it was an easy choice for me. I was going to go into environmental sciences. That was my way of being able to spend time outdoors. And I was more interested in the environment than like a biology degree where it's like, I'm going to focus on these types of animals or something. It's like, I can just be outdoors anywhere with an environmental degree, and I can kind of live and work wherever I wanted in my mind with that behind me.
That makes total sense. So more of the general sense of just, I love nature, I want to be outdoors, and I need to cultivate a way to make this my life. Like it was
correct.
The seeds were planted when I was young, and I need this to keep going.
Yeah, and I think the idea of giving back, so conservation and responsible use was always really big for me. My father adored Native American culture and how like they would basically like the outdoors was their church. It was their God, the spirits, like however you want to explain that. I'm no expert, but he really loved that idea of like, hey, you have the ability to do all of these things. He taught us in Boy Scouts at one point, like as the kids were like chopping down trees because we had axes, and that's what like 13-year-olds do. And I remember him being like, why are you doing this? What do you need from this tree right now? And the answer was nothing, like there was plenty of dead and down stuff that were around that we could collect and we could have a campfire with. There was no need to go out and kill a tree. And he was the same way when he went out, when he hunted deer. I would go with him, to hunt deer. And, he would always ceremoniously like thank the animal for giving its life up. And he was very respectful all the way to even when he went and butchered the animal and we had it in the house, we were always very appreciative of that animal. And so that's how I was raised. And then we got into scouting. And that's all about community service and giving back and leadership within the community. And so I look back on that now and I think, well, a lot of early guiding skills came actually out of Boy Scouts and all of the things that they did, but also sort of developing this mindset that would take me, into my college programs and then ultimately into conservation-based travel of, giving back and thinking about conservation and wilderness ethics and the human relationship with nature. That was always a very important part of my youth and continues to be an important part of my work.
So you had this light bulb moment. You're on the trail. These guys are like, you need to do this for a living. And you're like, oh shit, I need to do this for a living. So you get off the trail and you have this epiphany. What in the world did you do next? Like, how did you become a guide? What is the Becoming Guide 101?
Right.
What did you do?
Right. This guy flipped a switch to the light bulb, right? Like kind of turned me on to this idea of like, oh, hey, this is kind of a thing. You could do it. It came at the right time in my life when I was a little disenchanted with my work. But it was more like planting a seed rather than just like, oh, I'm going to catastrophically turn my life upside down and I know exactly what I want now and I'm driven towards it. It was more of just like, hey, this other world exists where you can take people on trips and you can be in the outdoors. And to me, what did that mean at the time? Well, now I'm like 22 or 23 or something years old. I was heavily into rock climbing and mountaineering. And like when I thought of guiding, I think of this, right? So there's a few different ways that guides can add value to the experience. And one is, and probably the most common thing that people think about is like you're an enabler where you can take people out into these wilderness settings and get them through very challenging experiences as they're a guide that they might not be able to do on their own. So rock climbing, river rafting, mountaineering, you think of these sort of things where the guides is local knowledge, expertise, risk management, technical abilities, like they can get people that might not be able to do things on their own up somewhere. And, the basic foundation of guiding is probably that, but enabling is just one function of, four as of a guide. And so that's what I was thinking about. And being a big rock climber, I was like, okay, I'm going to go out. I got my medical certifications. I started getting like, vertical rope rescue. I also did a lot of caving stuff. So I had actually horizontal rope rescue, which is kind of weird, like into like be able to get people through cave passages. And like, I started doing this kind of stuff and, it's all of the hard skills, the technical skills. And again, that's what people think of when they first think of guides. And so it ended up being a great foundation for me and a way in. So I started leading rock climbing and backpacking trips and some, kind of light mountaineering kind of stuff like summer mountaineering types of things. And I was able to get a job after a couple of years of getting more experience on my own. I traveled around the US a little bit, took some classes, did some like kind of little side guidey things. But my first real job then was in California, maybe three or so years later.
And what was that job? Was it one of these more enabling type guiding roles, or what was the one that finally gave you like, I am a guide?
Well, it's a wonderful company called Southern Yosemite Mountain Guides. And what makes SYMG very unique is that we were able to provide something a lot more than just enabling. Even though we did a lot of rock climbing and mountaineering, we also did a lot of backpacking. We even had a big stock supported program where you'd go onto the trails and have mules either pack you into a base camp and everyone would do hikes and peak ascents from there, or we would travel big sections of the trail. Like we would cross Yosemite, we would do the John Muir Trail. And so what made SYMG so special was not only just the programming, but then the connection to wilderness and building relationships with the people that you're there, helping people overcome things. And most of our trips, the vast majority of the trips there, they don't center around, let's get to the top of this peak and pat ourselves on the back and take pictures. It's let's spend some time out in nature. How long do you have, And that's what was really wonderful about it. And it really tunes people into the place that they're in. It encourages reflection and they come out, having been transformed in various ways. They're not just succeeding and overcome challenges, but they're realizing, things about Well, there's all sorts of things to discover, about yourself and the place that you're in and your place in the world and your relationship with nature and your relationship with your other travelers that you've met and all of these things. And so exceptional guides are able to bring out a lot of those things out of those experiences, and then crafting those trips and the itineraries around sort of creating those transformational experiences is what SYMG is really about. And mostly those kind of experiences, I guess traditionally, a lot's changed in the last number of years, but traditionally it's not the mountain guiding companies that are doing that. It's more like the luxury travel, or, we have transformational travel trips that are cultural, but nobody really thought about that from a mountain guiding perspective. And SYMG was always really good at realizing the importance of that and the value of that, and being able to cross over between this sort of high-end guiding, but in a very accessible way.
Wow.
So that's how I started, and it was very formative, and then that has taken me on to other things as well to complement.
Yeah. So then what would you say is, now hearing that style of guiding, as well as some of the other visions that we have of guiding, what would you say it is that you do now? What is the style, or what is it? And how did you make that transition into what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I think so. Maybe everything we've talked about so far is, sort of sent me on a trajectory where, as a guide, I found it to be a lot more rewarding to have those transformational travel experiences with people, rather than just showing them somewhere they can, say, okay, I've been to Yosemite, I've seen the waterfalls, or I did it at the right time at sunset, got these great pictures because I had a guide that knew when to go and it wasn't going to be crowded and I can get the good pictures. Like that's successful guiding, right? An successful experience. Or you get people to the top of the mountain, or you descend the river, like all those classic sort of things. It's like, okay, we did it, check, right? But the things that are, that people can carry with them for the rest of their lives in terms of transformation. And so that trajectory sent me now into conservation travel. And I do a lot of work with another company called Natural Habitat Adventures. And Natural Habitat is partnered with the World Wildlife Fund. And our trips are based in nature and reflection and connecting people to the natural experience, but then also trying to spark within them a desire to be ambassadors, stewards, and advocates for the wild places and for wildlife all around the world. And I find that particularly rewarding, sort of culminating my own trajectory, starting with my dad and the Boy Scouts and all these things, because now I can give all those things back, and in a relatively compressed amount of time, can help people through these transformational experiences. And as I'm saying this, Brooke, I have to say, like, it sounds all kind of heavy. Like, oh, now you have your own mission and people are coming on these trips and you're going to try to mold them somehow. And it's not really like that. For me, also guiding, it's taught me that different people, either want or do not want to receive certain things. And so working with your guests on the trip, your clients, and understanding, where they're at, meeting them there, and then just offering doors for them to walk through is, I think, what exceptional guiding is all about. Like if a guide like me goes in and you have an agenda and you're going to try to force these things on people, it's never going to work. That's not what people are there for. They're there to have an experience. They're there to have a vacation. They still need to relax. They still want to feel rewarded for their efforts and the challenges and risks that they face. But at the end of the day, we know from studies through the Adventure Travel Trade Association and universities that have done studies that people do recognize and value transformational experiences, and they do seek that. And so in a subtle way, if the guide is able to create opportunities for those people and draw attention to things, and then people say, aha, this is interesting to me, this connection, this little bit about this wildlife or this management issue, this conservation issue, whatever it might be in this area that they've now come to sort of experience and appreciate, it becomes important to them, then they can engage with you on that. And if not, that's fine too. Like,
Yeah. I can totally see that. Because I've been now on similar trips around the world at various luxury levels. And I don't know, it's just, some people, they are really there. They just want to check this wildlife destination off a list. They are just there that they really want to go to the Galapagos.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that because their money is now being put in that area to help protect that land. And then there are other people where they're like almost in tears because the experience is so moving. And then I'm sure navigating that from your perspective could be sometimes, I would imagine, difficult, sometimes really not. I mean, how do you manage just different people
Yeah.
through these things? Because I can only imagine how hard it can be at times.
I think you're right that like people are there for different reasons, and it's important to honor why people are there. And we throw around the word guide, but really, if you think about a guide, right, like you should be meeting people where they're at and then guiding them through, this experience, and they can take things out of it, whatever it may be. You help them understand the places, more than they did before. You help them to have fun by easing the burden of operations and decision making and risk management, all these things. There's a lot of value and just for them in allowing them to sort of figure out their own experience. But I think a good guide, can step back and recognize that like you're not creating the same trip experience over and over again, recreating it over and over again, right? The trip itineraries, even if it's a popular itinerary that you're guiding a lot, will have, a certain framework to it. But there's a lot of room for adapting that itinerary according to the interests and the abilities, the desires of the people that are on the trip. And so each trip can still be personal. And then even within that, you can find moments for individuals on the trip to have, a just sort of deeper, more profound, more enjoyable experience on their own in certain places. And it might just mean that they need a little extra time over here, and then you do something else with everybody else. Or, there's a lot of ways that you could finesse a trip, right? And I think that's the trick then in the end.
And I'm sure that comes with just lots of experience and lots of hours with people and lots of time in the field. Like, okay, I have this set of personalities. This experience is probably going to love it,
I think it's twofold. I think one, you're right. With experience, you just build up, a lot of arrows to have in your quiver. And then you say, oh, cool, I've done this, I've done that, I've seen this, I've seen that. You learn things from other guides. Guests ask you for things, and you're like, oh, that's something that people are interested in. They're asking me about it. Or you can get creative, knowing, what the people are interested in, like where the offerings of the destination and the people that are in the destination and the interests of the guests like kind of overlap. And it might be something that you've never thought about before, but you in getting to know people, then you're like, oh, hey, we can actually do this. And then bringing that out. So yeah, for sure, expertise plays a big role in that. But then also just being able to read people and caring and paying attention to those people. Because it is really easy, especially, some of the guiding seasons, you might lead an itinerary 4, 5, even 6 times, depending on the length of it in a guiding season. And that can be exhausting and overwhelming and maybe even uninspiring because, sometimes your guests are really difficult. Like you might not actually even get along with them. They might be challenging in some ways, and it's usually not the case, but it can be. And so keeping up the energy and staying proactive as a professional and recognizing like what people want and paying attention to them and listening to them and asking questions, getting to know them on a personal level. And so that's one of the other, main functions of a guide in terms of adding value. We talked about enabling, but being sort of the counselor, adopting a counselor role, and again, figuring out where the abilities and interests of these guests overlap with the destination is a super important function of guiding.
So all of this makes sense, especially having been on guided tours. When I was at the same company, that was my biggest experience when, I was going on to HAB site inspections and meeting our guides and having some unbelievable experiences, mostly because of them. I mean, yeah, when you're in the Galapagos, when you're in Churchill, when you're in these places around the world, it really is the guide that just make or break a trip. I personally think having, like I said, experiences in so many different ways. And I would like to bring this up a little higher for a second, is because so we were just in the nitty gritty. What is like a greater role that you feel that you play in conservation? What do you think that is? Like, so if we take it, the nitty gritty, I'm the guide, I'm bringing these people through these transformative experiences. Now, where does this fit in conservation, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where does it fit in conservation? And I think maybe even back up a second to something that you're sort of teasing around is, the guides, we get all the glory when things go really well. And it's like, oh, the guide did this and the guide did that. And, the guests will write in their evaluations how incredible it was with the guide and they want to travel with the guide. But the guide is the last sort of person in line that has created the framework for these transformational experiences. And a lot of those experiences can, be in the conservation realm for sure. But, somebody had to envision this trip. Then somebody had to go and, figure out what's possible in that area. Like, can we even do what you want to do? Or all of the things, operationally, like, hey, we could do these 4 things, but we can only do 3. Which ones, right? All that has to go. And then the marketing team has to come in and convince, potential clients that, hey, this is actually a good idea and there is value to this. And here's the actual price. Then the sales team gets on there and they answer everybody's questions. They make them feel good about it. Then it goes back into operations where they actually put all the details in and they book hotel rooms and they have a, special guest that's going to come out and speak about a conservation issue, or you're going to get to, see something about wildlife. And then the guide shows up and handholds people through that whole experience that's already been planned, and maybe even took 2 years to plan in the case of some of these trips, right? So I think it's important to recognize that guides get all the glory. But then in your context of your question, then with conservation, like how do you do that? It's a little bit in the buildup. If we think of the ideas of interpretation, of just helping people sort of understand or relate to these places that they're traveling to, and all the people and wildlife, natural spaces, all these things that are contained within those destinations. Interpretation is, it's connecting people. And so the guides end up being interpreters, and then therefore sort of facilitating of this experience of understanding and connecting with the places. And so everything's been laid out for the guides to do that. Like, we're going to go here and then we're going to go there. And in the trips that are built really well with the idea of these, the transformational experiences in place, you do work up to these culminating experiences that usually happen, kind of 2/3 of the way into the trip, or maybe like closer to the end of the trip, where it's like, okay, boom. And then there's something that's like, that people have worked for. They've overcome some risk, they've overcome some challenge, or it's just, a really special type of wildlife moment, or they meet a very special guest and speaker. And everything leading up to that has given them context, just sort of intellectually and emotional context to lead up to that transformative experience. And so skilled guides are good at laying the seeds, right? Planting the seeds along that journey that the operations staff has kind of like made a framework for. And then all of a sudden everybody comes to that moment. Then the guide has to make that moment special. You have to allow people the time and that moment to enjoy it, to have it sink a little bit more deeply into their hearts and minds, encouraging reflection and that sort of thing, asking people questions about what they're experiencing, how they're feeling in that moment, and then comes a little bit of follow-up after that of like, wow, that was really profound. Here are the things that you can do to help, sort of continue that from, if we're thinking about our conservation trajectory, then it's like, okay, like if you want to care for this place or this, creature that you've, just had this emotional encounter with, here's how you can be a good steward for them, or here's how you can advocate for them, or here, by donating money or participating in these projects, or here's how you can become an ambassador by telling your friends and grabbing your megaphone and using, your blog or your social media or your podcast or your songs or your art or whatever you have available to you to go out and tell the world. And so when I think of conservation travel and conservation messages, those are the outcomes that I would love to see from people. And again, you're not going to get that out of everybody, but the people that are there for these transformative experiences and are coming on these trips because they care and want to learn more and appreciate and do well, that trajectory is set up for them to be successful in what they're trying to achieve, and we're there to facilitate that experience for them as guides.
Nice. So almost like a conservation messenger, essentially.
Yeah.
Like I have the knowledge, but I need you to have the light bulb moment so that when you're ready to get this knowledge, then you are ready to act upon it. Because I mean, how many campaigns have we seen of do this for conservation, and then it never sinks in. But when this very prime emotional moment happens, then you have this card that you pull out and be like, this is what you can actually do about it. You know what you're feeling right now? You can actually do something, and I have it here for you.
Right. Yeah, we are. We can message those things, and a lot of times people want direction of like just cutting through the noise. Like, hey, I'm really interested in big cat conservation. I see all of this stuff on the website, like what's real, what's not, where's my money best spent, or what programs can I participate in. And so that's really important. But I think you used a couple times you used the word feelings, and I think that's the most powerful thing, because a lot of people do care about these conservation issues, wildlife issues that they see on the internet or they watch in documentaries, and it's like, oh, wow, yeah, that's really something. But when they get on the ground and they feel that for themselves and they develop an emotional connection, then they really, truly start to care about those things to the point where they want to become involved. And that's one of the big things about conservation travel, is that it really connects people on a personal level to these issues that are out there in the world. And great programs, great guides can help people with that.
That all makes sense, and you have the experience, the knowledge to go with it. And so that, I think, is the perfect segue. And so you very recently published a book called The Professional Guide's Handbook: How to Lead Adventure Travel Trips and Expeditions. Why in the world did you write a book? Where did this idea come from? I mean, there's so many incredible guides out there with so much great experience, and yet you were like, I need to do this. I need to get this out there. So tell me everything.
What happened? It was more just that somebody needed to get it out there, I think. Mm-hmm. Travel right now is a growing industry. Within the travel sector, actually, an interesting statistic that I learned recently in researching the book was travel and tourism makes up 10.3% of the gross domestic product, global domestic product.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
I got this wrong.
Yeah.
Gross. Yeah. Global product. Yeah. 10.3% of all the money made in the world is travel and tourism related. Within travel and tourism, then adventure travel and conservation travel is part of that, is the fastest growing sector by a long shot.
Oh, it is. Oh,
it is. So that's really interesting. To know, but it also highlights, like, wow, this is rapidly growing. How do we keep up with that? And so, again, if we just think about all those functions of a guide, it's really easy to find somebody that can take you hiking or can take you rock climbing. Like, listeners probably know people that are, wow, that person's an excellent rock climber. Or, oh, you want to go down a river, like jump in with my buddy, whoever, they're awesome. That doesn't make them a great guide. It makes them a great river rafter, right? And so what we're finding is that a lot of the people that, have a connection to the natural world and want to be a guide and want to spend time in the outdoors with people don't have these deeper skill sets when we're talking about interpretation, transformative experiences, but also just decision-making in group settings, advanced risk management, leadership skills, group, sort of team building, management, that sort of stuff. And really even just understanding of the travel industry, guest expectations, what are the potential outcomes of trips, what do guests expect when they're there, what do they want their experience to be like. And it's really difficult to train people on trips because oftentimes in the outdoors we're dealing with small groups that are hiking. Our national parks, national forests all over the world have quota systems. Your groups can't be very large. So then are you going to take a paying guest out in order to put a guide in to train? That affects operational margins. So all of these things. make it really difficult to train guides. Also, you can't just train guides in front of a group, right?
Right.
It's like, hey, Brooke, I want you to, give these people a briefing and like let them know like what we're going to do today, and then you do it, and of course you would do a wonderful job, but say a different Brooke did a really an exceptionally poor job, you can't really critique that then in front of all of the people that are there. So it's your ability to mentor and train people in the field is very limited because you're trying to run a trip with guests actually being present. And so the need for a handbook, was there, and somebody needed to do it. And then COVID hit. And suddenly a lot of us were out of work, myself included, or at least out of field work. And I had all this material built up from years of, leading guide training programs and creating content and, this big catalog of stuff. And I thought, well, now's the time I'm going to compile all this into something useful for everyone.
Nice. And so, one, I don't know how many people listening have written a book. I have never written a book. What is that process? How did you get it from idea to actual in print? And then also too, if you wouldn't mind to explain, why print as well? There's so many different outlets now. You could have done YouTube videos, you could have done a whole blog series, you could have done a podcast. Like there's so many things that you could have done. So why a book? And then how in the world did you do it?
I found the book to be a better format than some of those others you mentioned because it's a nice reference in one place. There's a narrative that goes along with that, the book from start to finish. And so I don't have to write it as if somebody's going to read about this section on its own or that section on its own. By the time I get to certain topics and certain chapters, I know that they've come through other ideas, and I can use those ideas and that language readily and not have to be recreating and re-explaining things and laying foundations for understanding one thing based on your knowledge of another thing, right? So the book is a nice flow for that. I guess maybe, I'm a little old school at 45 years old. I like just having a book. Like I don't like reading things on the computer or on Kindles and that sort of thing. So naturally, just the book feels better to me. There are ebook versions that are coming out shortly.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So there will be a Kindle version for people that would prefer a Kindle version. And then in writing and envisioning the book, I wanted the outcome to be this idea of the guides being the facilitators of these like transformational experiences. That was the thing. So the theme through the entire book is sort of understanding and meeting guest expectations. And a lot of that is understanding and meeting people where they're at and being able to be flexible and adaptable and using all of your skills to do that. And so me being able to tell that story within the context of teaching people leadership and decision-making or all this, it gave a big, it gave a foundation, a platform, I guess, for having those different conversations and just being like, all right, why are you choosing to do what you're doing? Well, it's because you have this goal of exceptional guest experiences and transformational guest experiences. And so then how do you craft everything around that? And so that was my take on guiding and writing the book. And so that was my primary focus every time I was writing any of the chapters, and the outcomes then could be that guides, like, we're not just taking people on vacation, we're just having fun. Like those days are sort of old, those olden days are gone, where, good guides can have very rewarding long-term careers because we're creating these, transformational experiences that then make people just sort of better humans. They understand each other in these places and the wildlife and, management topics and what's happening in other countries and relating to all of these things. And I think that's what exceptional guiding and exceptional adventure travel program can bring to people. And it's like, sure, you might be doing that while you're river rafting or while you're going on a big like ski tour, but that's just sort of the setting and the context for understanding these bigger things. And that's what the book is all about. And that's what excited me about writing the book. And I hope that sort of proliferates through the guiding community, that we're not just out there for this like hedonistic playtime and for checking things off of boxes and putting pictures on Instagrams, but there's a lot from travel that we can take that make us better world citizens.
Yeah, completely agree. Like I said, every single time I know the difference. Like in my bones, I can feel the difference when I've been on a guided trip and when I've not been on a guided trip. And I have fun no matter what because this travel, and I'm a very wanderlust person. I just can't sit still to save my life. But it is amazing the difference when you have a really good guide. And I don't know what it is. Like I don't know what the secret sauce is that they bring. And that's why I think it's so special now that you've written this down to help cultivate that and give direction to the next wave of guides. Because if this is a growing industry, then we need more resources out there to do this right. And as we've seen tourism grow, there is a lot of ways to do it right, and there's a lot of ways to do it wrong. And it would just be fair to assume that also is the same with guiding. And I think that's a perfect segue, which I didn't even know I was going to go in this direction. What do you think, or what have you seen, or a lot of the common mistakes that you've seen guides do over the years, or that's a really easy to, I don't know, get a mentality or do, or I guess, yeah, how do you do it guiding wrong? And
Yeah.
like, what is wrong guiding? Or maybe if somebody is thinking about becoming a guide, and what are some easy traps that you see them get in just to avoid that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of examples of poor guiding. I like what you said though about you've been with a bunch of guides and you don't know why they were good and don't understand the secret sauce, and that's why they were good. Because a lot of what good guides do is happening in the background, and they're not showy, they're not A types. Like sure, they might be fun, outgoing people that are, cool to hang out with, but they're not making the trip about them. They're making the trip about whatever is happening at that time and place and connecting the travelers to those things and then allowing the travelers to have that experience and connection. The guides that fail, either, just in their career or even on a particular trip, are often making the trip about them, their own interests and abilities. Like, hey, I'm going to force you out into the rain and we're going to get, to this place because I want to go. And people aren't into it, and you could do something different instead, to make up an example. Or they're trying to make the trip easier for themselves, right? Like it's the third, fourth trip of the season, and it's like, instead of being flexible and adaptable and paying attention to the people, they just recreate the wheel. And they're like, this is what I did last week and it worked great. I want to have coffee at 7:00, to be here for coffee at 7:00. If you're not here, you don't get it. Right. And then I'm going to move on to something else because I need to make my working life easier. Those are the guides that are failing. And then of course there's just the classic, sort of guide that is the trip is all about them and their, how many times they run the river and all their success stories and, the kind of, and that stuff's fun. It's great to tell stories around the campfire and hear that and connect people to the guiding life. But when you do that too much and it's just about you and all the things and everybody else is just sort of being strung along with you, then that's too much. Like you need to find a balance there and, connecting them to your life as a guide and the exciting life of just sort of, living the dream, so to speak, and not making it about them.
Yeah. I can totally see how that would be more of like, the secret sauce of just really taking people through the experience. And what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, the word I use in the book, if it helps, is
because I don't have a copy yet.
Is a facilitator of the travel experience,
yep,
right?
That's the word.
So we think about guide, but it's sort of thrown around a little bit. You're a cat person, Brooke, so I'll say it's kind of like a pride alliance. Like, oh, it's a pride alliance. That's just what it is. It's called. We don't think, but if you really think about that, like it's a pride of lions. Like they're proud, right? They have pride, and like, what does that mean? And like that term came from somewhere, and it relates to the personalities of those lions. It's really cool, and I think guide is another term that's like that. And so, instead of sort of convincing people, of what it means to really be a guide in the book, I just started using the word facilitator. And then therefore their guides are facilitators of the travel experience. And I like that because, it makes you stay cognizant that of the fact that you're there as a leader to help people realize their own aspirations, right? You're not saying this is what success looks like. They're telling you what success looks like, and then you're facilitating the means to the end so they can achieve what they've come there to achieve on their own. So I really like facilitator.
That's absolutely the word I was looking for. It was just like,
Sure.
it was stuck somewhere back there, but you, spot on. And so if somebody listening is maybe early career, or maybe this is sounding like, oh my God, maybe they are towards the end of their bachelor's or something, or towards their end of their school, whatever. And they're like, I think I might want to become a guide.
Yeah.
What would you like to tell those specific people before maybe they've just started down this path, or they're considering it heavily? What should they know?
Yeah. Great question. I think they should know that guiding is all about customer service. It's not about rock climbing. It's not about hiking. It's not about going on safari. It's about customer service. And so you really want to be a people person. You need to like sitting down at meals and getting people to talk about themselves. You need to figure out ways to understand their aspirations and desires and interests, and then connecting them to those places. That's what guiding is all about. And especially for new guides, like you need some resume builders, and the easy way to resume build is to go out and take a bunch of courses and get certified and all kinds of stuff. And that stuff is awesome. Every guide needs to have that. And it's a very basic requirement for the job. And so don't get too distracted by those things, because those classes are often very empowering, but they're not what guiding is all about. Those are just tools that allow you to be a good guide.
That makes sense. And I think an extension of that, so let's get a little personal, if you don't mind. What would you say is some of the hardest parts of this? I mean, because you said you've been doing this now for a long time. I mean, luckily, I know your partner. She's she's also in this field, but maybe not everybody has that same, I don't know if luxury is the right word, but just setup. You are gone a lot, and for probably extended periods of time. How do you manage that? What are the difficult parts of this so-called like dreamy career, where a lot of people might see it with just the stars in their eyes, but there has to be some difficult things with this as well?
Yeah, this is a great question, and actually, this this whole topic was suggested by a good friend of mine, a fellow guide that helped do some editing on the book, and she suggested for the title of the chapter "Behind the Glamour," and so that's how it lives in the book. And you're right, Brooke, that just like any job, I think there's pros and cons to it. So, what are the difficulties in guiding? The pay's not great. By the time you get, further advanced in your career and you're good at what you do and you have some choice in where and when you're working and for what companies, then, it starts to become viable. But certainly for a lot of guides, particularly that are doing sort of the hard skill guiding, rock climbing, skiing, that kind of stuff comes to mind. You're basically getting paid in sunsets for a little while. So you need to be able to sort of get through the hump and push through that in order to turn things into a career. Which is why we see, river rafting guides sleeping in an old school bus, with the wheels up on blocks at the warehouse and, that kind of stuff. And so you have to be ready for some hacks probably to get your foot in the door. Some other things, you're often contracting, you're not an employee, so you won't have benefits. So you need to think about your future and dental plans and all of these things, investing in yourself that way, which can be tough to do when you're not getting paid a lot. Relationships, as you alluded to, can be really tricky. I find in relationships, it takes a lot of communication with your partner, to understand and recognize and then work towards each other's needs. Along with that is, when you're on trips, I find that you have no choice but to be focused and very present on those trips, because the guests they just demand it. You'll have a lot of them. When you're at home, you need to be a little bit more proactive than at being present. This is something that I personally, am always trying to work towards, because I get so tired working on trips and giving all my energy, and then I come home, your friends, family. My partner Sarah, she's excited to see me, and then all I want to do is sleep and relax and just check out, right?
Right.
And so trying to be present and dedicate your time and energy to the people who are very important in your life, I think is very important to recognize and to do.
You must drink a lot of coffee. Right? Just some way to keep up with the energy level the whole time.
Coffee beans, chocolate covered coffee beans are my new secret weapon when I'm guiding. It's like about 2 p.m. is when that bag comes out.
That's when the bag comes out.
Yep.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I think also too, thanks for sharing that. And no, it's just like you said, the glamour of it. There is another side to the coin. There is, if this was an easy career, more people would do it. But it does take a while to get your foot in the door and to grit through it and to go without little pay and probably go through some failed relationships and all of this other stuff to get to, this point. And I wanted to make sure that we took time to also talk about that, all these amazing transformative experiences where guides are in the conservation sphere, why they're so important, especially in adventure travel and conservation travel. So gotta be very transparent on what this is.
I appreciate you, painting the entire picture. It's important. But the good news too is, so again, traditionally, guiding's been very competitive. It's hard to get your foot in the door, but a lot of people want to do it, right? And so then companies sort of had the upper hand where they're like, hey, I don't have to pay you a lot of money because you're super excited to do this, right? Now with the growth in tourism, everything's just exploding, and there are in some sectors even more jobs than guides right now, or qualified guides. So it's a great time to be getting into the industry, and a lot of these things that have been challenging in the past are a lot easier now. And for the right person with the right skill set, the right point in their lives, you can come in and be working as a well-paid professional right off the bat if you're in the right part of the industry at the right time. But I think the important thing to know about getting a job in the guiding world is that guide services, you're building teams, right? And people that have various strengths that all will balance each other as the team. And so one year you might apply and not get the job. It's like, well, they don't need somebody with your strengths. They have those strengths covered. They need other strengths brought into the team. So keep applying, and then they can get in. And it's better now than it ever has been in the industry as far as pay and compensation and schedules and all of those things. Like, companies are more and more in tune to that and more willing to make the lifestyle around guiding easy for their guides, because they want their investment to pay off long term and keep those guides around.
Oh, that's exciting to hear. I love conservation travel. I love going around the world. So that's fantastic to hear. And I think it might just be really fun to hear, where do you guide? Like, where are some of the destinations that you are normally with people around the world? And then on that, do you have a particularly crazy story that you can share? And crazy can mean anything.
Sure. Okay, part one, where do I guide? I like alpine and polar regions. So the mountains in California, Yellowstone, I love Yellowstone. And then the Canadian Arctic, in Greenland, and in Antarctica are the places that I currently guide. They're all wonderful destinations. I feel very fortunate that I have a strong say in the trips that I am able to guide right now, and the places that I go, and then the seasonality of those schedules is sort of spread out, and so it's a really nice lifestyle on those trips. As far as crazy stories, I mean, sure. What are you looking for?
You have to have so many. How many places you've been around the world? I mean, when I said that, what was the first story that came to mind?
Well, actually, I have this book on my mind, and it's funny that you haven't seen the book yet, because you're really good at pulling out these things that would be interesting to people. And a lot of the things that lead my chapters are things that you're asking about. So there's another chapter about challenging situations and challenging people. That's called When Things Go Sideways. And I actually started just rattling off some of the like crazy little like one hitter things. And so some of the things that are in there, we had a lady, my buddy and I, we had a lady that was in this sort of drug induced sort of state and showed up to a welcome dinner and caused a big scene and ended up screaming and yelling and got a little bit violent. And the end of that story was that she was literally handcuffed and drug across the lobby of the hotel and thrown in jail for the night, like at the welcome dinner, when in a group of people she had never met before. So that was pretty wild. I had a rifle pulled on me one time just by this hunter that was out in the woods. Just saw our backpacking group and for whatever reason just came out and started giving us some words. And it was a while ago. I forget exactly how it went, but I remember it ended with him. The whole time he had the gun pointed straight at me in my face because, of course, I'm the guy with the logoed shirt on, right, leading everybody around. But he was pointing the gun at me and he said, when he was letting us go, he's like, all right, well, just don't do anything stupid. I'll be watching you, and it's like, what does that mean? So that was a little unnerving. We had our mules on one of these stock supported trips. We were at, day 5 out of a 10-day trip, and we're at 11,000 feet, and it started to snow, and the mules didn't like it very much, and so they somehow managed to get away, and that was it. Like, we never found them. And so we had all our stuff like up at 11,000 feet. We're in the snow and the packer, and I couldn't find the mules anywhere. And it turns out, we found out a couple of days later, like they just went home. Like it took them 3 days. They just hiked back to their corrals. And in the meantime, we just had our little day packs. And after spending one day in camp looking for them, the weather was poor and there's no way that we can continue over these high mountain passes on our route. And so we just packed everything that we needed for a long day, plus some emergency supplies. And we ended up hiking out a side trail back into the front country and organizing transportation for ourselves. We had to cut the trip short. So yeah, there's been some fun ones, memorable ones over the years where things sort of went a little sideways.
Oh my God.
But it's adventure travel, it's all part of the charm. And even if those things aren't what you really want to happen, you can look back at them afterwards and yeah, they're great stories. And those people that were on those trips have great cocktail party stories now they can tell their friends, and it's all part of the charm of adventure travel trips.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, to take this back again, I'm a big picture person. I love looking at things from 10,000 feet and just seeing the forest for the trees, essentially. And so to bring it back to you as a conservationist and being to so many wild places and seeing amazing things, if there's one message that you would like to share with everyone listening, what would that be?
That's a great question. In an environment right now, a global environment, where everybody's thinking about, things like climate change and carbon emissions and impact and reducing impact, I've seen a fair amount of discourse on like, oh, travel. It's like, oh, you shouldn't be going to these places. You really care about these national parks. You care about these animals. You don't go, right? But I think that's doing a disservice to those places, actually. And what I like about conservation travel is that people do develop these emotional connections to places, and they become stewards, ambassadors, and advocates for these places. And that's what incites change. That's what, elicits support. And if we don't feel personally connected to those things, or connected to the people that feel connected to those things, right? Friends of the conservationists that then inspire other people, then all of these issues are just going to live out there on their own and nothing's going to be done about it. And so when I think of, conservation travel, I think of sustainable travel, responsible travel, ethical travel, where we're giving back to the communities, we're supporting those places, we're supporting the local people, empowering them. And that's what conservation travel is all about. And so tourism brings in money, tourism brings in support, tourism brings in awareness. Tourism in a lot of cases, especially third world countries, offers an alternative to things like poaching and deforestation, where tourism dollars are more powerful. Because oftentimes it's not that people, don't care about the gorillas in Uganda or, the forest down in the Amazon. The local people, it's not that they don't care, it's that they still have their basic needs. Like they need to find food, they need to make money to support their family. And if all that's available to them is, deforestation or poaching, that's what they're going to do. But if we can bring in tourism and we can create safari lodges, we can, we can use hotels, we can use transportation services, we can use local guides, you can train more local guides, then that creates a different economic stream, financial stream for these people, and then therefore those areas are protected. And so, maybe we do need to find ways to offset our carbon emissions and, reduce recycling and waste in some of these communities. And responsible travel companies like Natural Habitat Adventures that I work for have figured out how to do this in most of their destinations. And other companies can do that as well. We can follow suit. And so, when I think about these bigger picture, like why do we do things, if we're going to do these things, and I see conversations blowing up on Facebook, I think, yes, we should be doing these things, but we should be doing it. All companies should be doing it in a very transparent, ethical, responsible way. And then travel is great. And the more of it, the better.
Yes.
Right.
I love it. All those reasons and more is also why I'm in this field. And it's just so funny because you came to this field from like the guiding standpoint and just loving outdoors and being in nature. And I came into it from like the science side, being a biologist. And it's like, this is one of the only solutions we have to keeping the wildlife around. And it's amazing. And to know that it's growing is really exciting. And to know that there are resources now, like your book, out there for people. And can't wait to see how that grows and what's going to come of it. And of course, seeing your whole journey for the past few years have just been really, really exciting. But we've been talking about your book for a really long time now. So how in the world can people get their hands on it? How can they get a hold of you? Maybe if they want to come out and be like, Colby, I actually want to go on a trip with you. Like, what are the ways?
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. Well, I imagine you're probably going to put some links in the podcast notes. So that's a good place for people to start. Guideshandbook.com is the website. People can learn more about the book there if they're interested in guiding. And you can also purchase the book right there. That's a great way to purchase the book versus Amazon. Great message for people is if you can order things direct, then the people that spent the time creatively to make these things happen get a little bit more of a kickback. So it's always appreciated to go straight through the links to the publisher. That was shameless, but it's the truth. Otherwise, folks can follow me on Instagram. I'm at Colby Outdoors, and you can see what I'm up to as far as adventures. And then the companies that I mentioned, Natural Habitat Adventures is who I'm primarily working with these days, a global leader in conservation and responsible tourism travel, and then Southern Yosemite Mountain Guides as well.
Nice. And just like you said, I'll have all of those in the show notes. So just head on over to rewildology.com and we will make sure all those links are there. But again, thanks so much, Colby, for taking time on your crazy schedule to come out and hang out with me.
Well, thank you, Brooke, for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks to all the listeners who participated today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, thanks again for listening to this episode of Rewildology. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button to never miss a future episode. Do you have a cool environmental organization, travel story, or research that you'd like to share? Let me know at rewildology.com. Until next time, friends, together we will rewild the planet.